Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I am very happy to welcome Brad Strock today at our Fireside chat. Hi, Brad.
Hello, Beatrice. Thank you. A pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I have invited Brad because he's got a wealth, absolutely wealth of experience. He's very kind to share with us. Brad has been working for over 30 years with one of the biggest companies in the world. He spent years working as the CIO of PayPal, working on disruptive technologies and digital transformation. I know you have been done some amazing work with PayPal, responsible for 200 markets, I think 1,400 people in 60 locations, and during the time when PayPal was really doing some amazing things and which effectively grew the company every year by 20% in revenues. Prior to that, you worked for big companies like banks like JP Morgan and Bank America, also helping with the digital transformation and implementing new technologies. And the reason why I ask you to talk to us is to share your experience and your knowledge with our community, how to create something, an amazing product which is successful commercially, but came from an idea or early stage, either science or technology. This is what our community is about. We chatted, I told you a bit earlier that it's all about science. Many of our community members work in labs or at universities or in companies, very often early stage projects or later. And we always believe our ideas and science is great. And we want to give it to the world, just how to do it. So that's why I ask you to share with you the experience, how to make the commercial success of it and share with the world. However, my first question is going to be about you personally, because you have started your professional career, actually higher education, not with the finance world, but as a mechanical engineer. That's what you studied first, and then you went to do your MBA. What's the reason you didn't want to be engineer? You changed your mind?
Yeah, well, so there's, I'll share a little bit of the context around that part of my story. So I was the first person in my family to go to college. And I really, when I was young, believe it or not, I think I was just odd in this way, but I believed I wanted to be a nuclear engineer. And so that's what I went to school initially for. And then as I studied, and then also I did what was called co-op at the time. So I would go to school semester and work a semester in the industry. And at that time, you know, I'm not young now, so that was back in the 80s. It allowed me to see what it was like to work in the nuclear industry, and frankly, at that time, it wasn't a growth industry. And I really realized that this is probably maybe reevaluate what I thought I wanted to spend my life doing. When I was really small, I thought I actually wanted to work on fusion, nuclear fusion, which is still an elusive thing. So anyway, I could take all my credits and transfer to mechanical engineering, and that's what I did. And I loved engineering, and I used those principles throughout my career. But I also really was interested in business, and so really decided I would stay and get my MBA. So interestingly enough, then in my career, I really realized that I love technology. And so even though my initial career path was not really typical for a CIO, it's probably more typical for a CFO, but I started kind of pointing my career more towards technology roles. And so when I look back, that mix of, even though I wasn't exactly follow the path I thought I would, that mix of technology and finance has actually been really useful to me. But when I first went to school, I didn't come from a background of really knowing a lot about academics. So I don't know that I really ever thought of myself as going full-time into academics. It just wasn't something that I really considered. And so anyway, that's a little bit about my background.
It's great to hear that you said that you used the skills while studying mechanical engineering later during the career. We very often say to academics, there's a lot of transferable skills you learn in academia.
Lots, yeah, for sure. Just how you approach problems, how you think about solutions, how you look for data to support decisions. All those things are really important.
That's so true. Prior to joining PayPal, you worked for JP Morgan, Bank of America in the capacity of an operation and technology manager. So moving from the big banks to PayPal, although when you moved, the company was already big and well developed, was an early stage startup, still, they were the disruptor of the industry you have been working for many years with the old guys, and you joined the new guys, I can say. What attracted you to this? This was the need for to work with the innovation for the disruptor?
Yeah, I think so. For me, it definitely was interesting to go into a much younger company that had a much more entrepreneurial spirit, that was moving quickly and disrupting established infrastructures and ecosystems. So that was definitely a part of it. But also for me, it's very important. One of the things that I've learned is very important that the culture of the whatever you're doing, whether that's in a company or that's in academics, whatever it is you're doing in nonprofits, the culture of the work environment, the people that you work with, the people that you work for, we're all wired differently. And one of the benefits in your career is you start to get a feel for how you're wired and the kind of cultures that work well for you. And so that's always, for me, whenever I've considered a career change or partnering with an organization now, the culture of that organization is very important, and also the mission. So and that was maybe less important to me earlier in my career, but I learned the importance of mission. And do I align with the mission of that organization? And is it a mission that is something that is, or is it going to change the world in some way? And so really for PayPal, there were those elements there, and still are, of democratizing money globally, operating in a global fashion. That was another attraction for me, was being able to operate globally as opposed to more centered in the US. So those were some of the things that were attractions to me.
I think you're going to be loved by our community because we are all mission driven.
Okay. It's important. I didn't realize how important it was. So I think early in my career. So one of the benefits of having a little bit of hindsight.
My main question to you today is about how to turn those ideas into great product. And indeed, when academics work on, scientists work on the ideas, is very much driven by this mission, by this idea for the improvement, right? This is how we are trained to make improvements to the world, to humanity. There's a lot of altruism there as well. But it's great, but at the same time, it doesn't help with turning this into commercial success. I think we are a little bit blinded by the love to our innovation. At the same time, it's needed. So where to even start? How to even? We have this great idea or the great science in our lab or on our computer, and what to even start to these first steps to the market?
Yeah. So it's a great question, Beatrice, and I'm by no means, the world's expert on this, but I have some opinions about it. And there's a lot been written about innovation, but I think specifically for the realm that your audience lives in, it obviously can be really difficult. And one of the things that that I've really come to believe is that we focus a lot in business, and you pick up you read business magazines or different publications, and there's a lot of focus on innovation and more around the realm of innovative solutions. And I really think that one of the paradigms that can be helpful is really focusing on the problems, and what I like to call the innovative problems, which seems kind of an oxymoron, but if you look at the things that in hindsight that have been hugely disruptive, and in particular around technology, almost all of them were addressed a problem that was hiding in plain sight. And whether it's what Uber's done to take a customer experience in a taxi that we've all done hundreds of times probably, that was really not a great experience, and yet it sort of never changed for a long period of time. So I think that there are signposts to innovative problems that can be helpful to start to get to think about how research, for example, might be applied, because it's going to need to be applied to a problem that has some benefit. Either it has an economic benefit or it has a societal benefit. And I think framing it in, let's think about searching for the problem that no one's discovered, is an interesting, at a minimum, it's an interesting mind exercise to start to approach these kinds of things. So I like to look at situations where things are expensive, things take a long time, they're risky, they haven't changed in a long period of time. Often, if you look at those situations, and you can start to see things where the application of a new technology or a new science might have an impact. The other framework that I think is really helpful, that maybe is not as frequently, doesn't come naturally in basic research, is to think about the customer. So there's always the customer. So who is the customer, and what is the customer's experience? And quite often, that experience is where you find the problems. Things are expensive, they take too long, they're risky, all those signposts that I mentioned. So I'm not saying that's a magic formula, but I think reframing it to be more about finding that problem is an interesting way, and maybe for your audience, it's a mental framework to use when you think about those things. So that's one idea. If that helps.
That's very, very much helpful, because we are very often focusing on the solution to first, and when we sometimes work with our community, we asking, how can you explain your research in plain English in 5 minutes, and they do struggle. There's a lot of struggle to explain that. And
I think finding that unknown problem, we always talk about the unknown solutions or the innovative solutions, but where the unknown problem is the realm of interesting, what's interesting, I think. So.
And so identifying the problem as a first step, how that's useful, how my science and my research can be useful, and I can solve this urgent problem for customers, people, or certain markets, and how to take that idea, from academics to the commercial world. We sometimes we're looking into different ideas, either patent this, or once it's published in scientific publication, it's out there in the world, but we still want to work on this. We can take as a startup, as a corporate. What are your experience and advice on that?
Yeah, I mean, all those paths, can be applicable. I think what's really important is to spend time in the environment, again, with the customer, whoever that is. And I use that term, customer term. It doesn't have to be an economic customer. There are things in the nonprofit world or the societal good where the customer may not be paying with money, but it's spending time with the end customer, and really understanding the problem and the experience is really important, and I think a step that can be easily skipped, because you learn so much from that experience, and so you kind of have to get your hands dirty a little bit, I think, but you'll get great insight, and you'll also importantly form relationships, because I think the other way that you can navigate that, because each situation is different, but it really is by talking to people who may have some association with what you're trying to do, and it may not be direct, but it's amazing. Not everyone will, but quite often people will take the time to talk and share. People like to talk about what they're doing, and so they'll share that, and so you learn. And then you may also, quite often, they may say you should talk to so and so, and so you start to have these relationships and connections, and you learn. And in that process, you probably will start to come to some conclusions about whatever it is you're working on, what a good path forward might be. Is it partnering with a larger company, or is it a startup? Are you even wired to be an entrepreneur in a startup? What does that look like? And most entrepreneurs will be willing to talk and share their experiences, and you can learn. Would I be willing to do that? Is that even something that I'm interested in? So, I mean, it's not unlike how you and I, Beatrice, came to meet and chat, and then said, well, hey, let's do this webinar. And so, I think sometimes we under leverage that. So that would be another aspect I would say is important.
And what are the key success factors? We think, okay, we have a good problem to solve, urgent problem. We have validated the idea. And we also have idea, okay, we either taking with corporate or startup. What are the key success factors then turn this into successful product? What are the things you would focus on? Yeah.
Well, so there's definitely things like, if we're in the realm of for-profit for a moment, there's definitely things like, what is the potential market size here? Is this something? Is the customer base very small and specialized? Is this consumers, or is the customer businesses? What size of business? What kind? So being able to analyze and at least estimate how many entities in the world might be interested in this, and what is the current problem costing those entities, whether it's people or companies. And so if you can quantify some of those things and say that the problem today is costing, let's say it's businesses costing, $10 billion globally to businesses in this industry, and we think we have a solution that can cut that in half. Well, now now you've started to frame what the potential market size could be if you were able to have it all, which you never are, but that can start to frame the opportunity. That's an important step. And then evaluating, how close are we really to having a marketable product? How many steps are left? What is the user experience like? How much more work and investment is going to be required? So you start to think about the costs and the benefits, and start to sketch those out. And then that can often lead you to say, wow, this is a huge opportunity. Nobody's looking at it. And maybe I'm wired to be an entrepreneur and I want to go take a shot at this. Or, you know what, maybe it's a great opportunity, but I'm not that. I'm not a go start my own company thing. So I'm going to go try to find partners that I can work with. So those are some of there's no playbook. I guess fortunately and unfortunately, there's no exact playbook because every situation is different. But I'd say those are the kind of questions that you want to ask yourself or your team. That helps.
Exactly. I was going to ask you about the team. What kind of people we should surround ourselves if we want to be successful in taking our innovation, making successful? You have built teams, you have managed hundreds of people, so you have lots of experience in that, but very often people who are coming from academia, especially with scientific background, are being identified as the techie people, and that's it. And indeed, many do not have business knowledge, but many do acquire later, and they're pretty good at this, yourself as well. What type of people in terms of skills, orientation, but also this personalities and character?
Yeah. Well, so I'm a very big believer in the idea that leadership matters. It matters a lot. I've seen situations oftentimes where someone who has great technical skills is super smart, but they lack leadership skills that end up failing. I've almost never seen a great leader fail because they didn't have the technical skills, because what a great leader will do is surround themselves with people who compensate for where they are weak. And so really the idea of a diverse team, where you don't want a team that thinks like you do, that looks like you do, everybody. You really want a team that brings a diversity of thought and behavior and the way they look at the world. I really do believe that's where you get the best outcomes. So, so you have to be intentional about that. And we all have I think an innate bias to associate with people who are like ourselves in some way. There's just a tendency for that, I think. So you have to guard against that and make sure that you're putting the best possible team you can together. And if you're the leader, it needs to be one where there are people on the team that will challenge you and call you out. And you have to be willing to do that. You have to create an environment and a culture where that's expected. I'd say all those are important things when you're putting a team together.
Especially for us, it's interesting how the product team and the tech team are working together. What kind of involvement you had? How did you feel in control of developing the products? I mean, was there any tension between the tech and the product teams on how well they work together?
Yeah, I think so. The conventional way in the past that technology products typically got built was you would have a product team and you'd have a dev team, and they're in totally different organizations. And you'd write up requirements and pass those to the dev team, and then you go through testing cycles. And I'd say the modern approach really combines those groups. So quite often now you see product and technology teams together that are organized around a particular customer or around a particular platform. And there's a mix of the talents. And you might have sort of a quote unquote product person leading the whole thing. You might have a technologist leading the whole thing, but it's one team as opposed to sort of separate silos. So, and I think that helps a lot towards having a common objective for the team. It helps educate engineers about what it's like and why is it important to think about product. And it also educates product people to understand what it takes to develop to develop great applications and great experiences.
When PayPal was launched some time ago, I think it was over 20 years ago. So, and when you worked for big companies, they were launching new products. There was no such a great tools we have now in startups like Heroku, the MS Azure and AWS and so on, which really help to speed up bringing those products to the market. And much faster scale up. How much time you think it would save you up and speed up if you would have that?
Yeah, well, I wasn't there at that time, so it's difficult for me to speak to it directly. But clearly today, there are so many, as you say, it used to be you'd have to go, rack and stack servers and rent and beg, borrow, and steal. And today, that capital cost is not there. You really pay for what you need. It's quick. I think the important thing about all that maybe sometimes gets missed is the real power is not so much in the fact that you're running things on another company's infrastructure. It is that you are using a development approach that is very integrated and very, very fast. So this idea of continuous integration, continuous testing, all those modern approaches are really built around the idea of being able to take that and put it in, as you said, in AWS or Azure or wherever. That's actually where in my opinion, the most power and benefit comes from, because it allows you to move really quickly. It makes things automated. That is what enables you to go fast. The fact that you can put it in someone else, the cloud means you're running it in someone else's environment. That's helpful and has benefits, but the real benefit, I think, is the processes and the automation you have. And many companies who move to the cloud, they actually skip that step, and they just find they're running it in someone else's computer and not necessarily more inexpensively. So at least that's my opinion.
My time for my questions are going to the end, and we're already getting some questions from the guys from the audience. However, I have some questions from me going back to our conversation at the start. I know that you are involved in non-profit. You very much care about innovation and good causes. And my question is, academics very often we asking what kind of problems we should be focusing on. Because we work very often in silos and a little bit sometimes detached from what's happening, although it's difficult to be detached now when the whole world has the same problem. And so finding the cure for COVID is probably on the number one for scientists. But apart from that, what are the other problems you would point the scientific community to focus on?
Yeah, well, there's so many, obviously, in the healthcare field, so many, whether it's malaria or lack of sanitation, I tend to think about what are the most basic fundamental problems that hold back societies. And so, education is one that continues to be, in most parts of the world, tremendous issue. We think the jury's still out on what we're having to do in many places today in COVID, and in terms of virtual learning. We'll see how much of that accelerates change there. I also think that if you look at many countries, being able to solve the problem of corruption is actually a really fundamental power, like holds many countries back. And it's endemic in virtually every country in the world, but in some countries it really is one of the major things that holds back development. And so are there solutions to that? Could there's been various attempts, but some of the blockchain-based cryptocurrency, that could actually make the problem worse, or maybe there's a solution there. Those would be some of the, but there's so many things that would benefit humanity, and especially the most vulnerable. But those would be a couple I mentioned.
All right, that's a good one, and we love problems, to work on them, complex problems. My very last question is around, and I would like to ask you for advice and a tip for all academics, how to fit in the corporate world. I'm sure you work over those years with a lot of people who've got a PhD, and some of were better, some they were worse. I'm sure they had some common ways of working. What was your experience working with them, and what is your advice for them for the transitioning from academia to industry?
Yeah, so I think probably my biggest advice would be to look for opportunities to kind of, as I mentioned before, to spend time in some way in industry, whether that's a semester, I don't know what the right word is, internship or partnership, but spending time to learn, I think. So also, first of all, there needs to be mutual respect. I think industry needs to respect that most of the great innovations and disruptions that we enjoy, including the internet itself today, had its roots in academic research. So, but also I think for academics, respecting that the whole way we're able to fund society in most countries is through for-profit enterprise that creates taxes, that funds universities, and so there is a place for all of this, and understanding how that works and what the language of business is I think is a good place to start. You don't have to become an expert, but if you spent 6 months working in a company in some fashion, you'd come away learning a lot about how that operates, for good and for bad. Like every organization, just like a university, there's good and there's bad. Stuff we like and stuff we don't like. But understanding that and what the language is, and then this notion of who's my customer and what's my customer's experience and what can I do to improve that. Those kind of things, I think, go a long way to enabling you to communicate and relate much more naturally. Those would be my thoughts.
That's a very good one. The understanding and mutual respect. We have some interesting questions coming out from the audience. If I can read it out to you. One is coming from Abhishek, which I know it's a pain point for the whole scientific community. So it's a very good question. How often we should leverage patent and copyright in building products? Coming from academia, we often publish in journals, knowing its economic significance. So once it's published out there, it's to use for everyone. But hold it back, or how often we should leverage that and where to hedge this.
So I'm not an expert in intellectual property or how to think about that, but I guess I would think that most institutions have some policies around that, and many have been pretty aggressive about developing patent portfolios. I guess and again, this is just my opinion. I think that if you think the idea has, you can't patent ideas, so whatever it is, the process or the molecule or the has value, patenting it provides some protection and control. You can always choose to give it away, but I guess once it's out there, you can't really choose to bring it back. So maybe it's my business side. I'd probably err on the side of patenting it. That doesn't mean that it always has to be commercialized in a for-profit way. But again, I'm not. Your audience probably has a lot more to say. It does sound like it's a pain point, so I'm sure they've got a lot more experience in that than I do.
I have a question actually from my co-founder, Chris, who is the CTO, and he sent me a couple of questions before to you as well. When PayPal found a product market fit and the user base grew quicker than ever, how close did the back end come to falling over completely?
Well, again, fortunately, it was probably before my time when those things happened. But pretty much all large, today cloud. But I think Microsoft Azure just had several outages over the last couple of weeks. So it does happen. Usually it's a result of change. And you have to really be intentional and do a lot of testing to try to minimize when it does happen. I think one of the things that used to be the case is that for companies like PayPal that tended to be cyclical in their business. So at least in the U.S., there's this used to be Black Friday, then Black Monday. Those dates were big shopping days. And so it used to be you'd spend a big part of the year building up the infrastructure to be able to handle those peaks. But one of the things, as we talked about, with modern approaches to development and really containerizing things and being able to shift loads, even in a private cloud, that's become much more manageable to add capacity in the short run. So it's less of a problem in terms of running out of capacity. But pretty much every startup that I know of has had, close calls with sudden death over things like that, of running out of capacity or tipping over. It's kind of a rite of passage. So
we have a question, a very different question from Ravi. As we come up with an idea which is slightly different from our field of expertise, and it requires some expert in order to proceed further, how to overcome with those difficulties, especially at academics?
So the question is around, if I have an idea, it's really kind of outside my area of expertise and I need to enlist the help of others. I think I would go back to this notion of really building a network of people and talking to people. Like the power of connections continues to amaze me. And so when you take the time to seek out people who have a certain set of experiences or background skill sets, and maybe only half of them end up talking to you, but you have these conversations, and then you learn of others and you start to build a relationship and learn. I think that's a really great way to explore things that are outside of your realm of expertise. And I think that's true whether it's in industry or academia. And there are tools today, whether it's LinkedIn or other platforms, that help you do that. It's really, really powerful. I mean, Beatrice, what you guys are building at Smart Tribe is really, that at its core, you're trying to connect people, and that is a huge. I don't think that people understand how beneficial that can be. Every conversation I have, I learn something, and I'm betting that your audience, one of the core common characteristics is an appetite for learning, and that you get that by obviously reading, but also talking to people. And as a benefit of that, you start to form a network. When you can help other people, somebody asks you a question, well, I got somebody that actually does that, you should talk to them. That's really rewarding. So that would be my thought.
It's so true. I remember we've been always going for our fundraisings, always groomed by the investors. What are the benefits? Why people would want to talk to academics and so on. So we always come up, well, it's about the mentorship, the jobs, the all kind of ideas. And then in the real life, those thousands of people from industry who are joining us, and half of them, the reason they're giving us why they do want to talk to academics is they just want to talk about interesting things.
Right. Yep. Because you know what, maybe I don't know if it's like this in academia, but a lot of times your day in corporate life is not necessarily filled with what I'd call interesting things. So yeah, that's I guess in some ways not surprising that they would like to talk to really smart people who are doing interesting work.
That's true. We have actually, since we are on philosophical mood, we have one philosophical question. How far the invention in artificial intelligence is going to drag the human race to the side of good or bad?
Wow. I mean, there's so much written. I was actually in a webinar yesterday where this was a topic. I would look to the history for evidence of how disruptive technologies were used for good or evil. And I think the answer is probably both. I mean, pretty much every major technological revolution had good things that came about and not so good things that came about. And it really, where it ends up is depending on, I think, how it gets managed and controlled. There are some really smart people who are really concerned about out in the future where this is gonna lead. Is it a science fiction kind of realm where the machines rule everything? And then there are others who think that that's far more unlikely. And I don't know where I come down on that. But I think that the time to, and this, I know this work is being done now, but the time to put those ethical and philosophical questions forward and have discussion and debate about it is certainly early rather than later. I think we did that with some success in biosciences. There were sort of guardrails that were established based on ethical consensus, but then inevitably those get pushed and breached, and so it's a really difficult situation. But I think the more we talk about it and pose these difficult questions, I think there's someone posted yesterday in this webinar in a site where you go to and you get presented with all these ethical scenarios that are, so, if I'm a machine driving a car, do I hit the bus or do I hit the person pushing a baby carriage? Because you have to, there's only one, you can only do one or the other, those things like those, at least to get people thinking of the, even if they're edge cases, what the ethical decisions are. I think that's beneficial.
Yes, it's up to us how we use the technology. It's not the technology itself, right?
Yeah.
We have a very different question, so it's a bit jumping from topic to topic. You're gonna have to exercise.
Yeah, no problem.
While building MVP, can you discuss how get correct customer feedback and market size before approaching investor, if there's any checklist?
What was the first part of that again, Beatrice?
While building MVP.
Okay.
Yeah, can you discuss how get the customer feedback and market size before approaching the investors?
Yeah. Well, so I think the, I go back to really, do you have a deep enough understanding of who the customer is, depending on the situation? Have you spent time with the customers, living with the whatever problem and experience you're addressing, and then based on that, estimating the total addressable market potential. And that's an analytical or research exercise. And then to decide what goes into it. So MVP in this case, they're referring to the minimum viable product, I think. So deciding what are those elements of the solution you're bringing to that innovative problem, to use my term from earlier. What's the minimum number of improvements and the kind of experience that would get people to try it, whether that's to buy it or if a company's buying it to it solves enough of the problem that they'd be willing to spend money on it if this is in a commercial realm. I don't know that there's all a checklist, but those would be the things that I would look at. And then obviously you need to have some idea of what kind of, if you're making a pitch to investors, of what's needed in terms of investment to get to the next round, or to the next phase. I also think that in those pitches, the team, who's the team and what's their level of experience and who's the leader, those are really, really important. Sometimes I think in venture funding, who the team is and what their experience is almost as like there are VCs will bet almost completely on the team, not necessarily even on the idea. Their belief would be, if I have the right team, they'll figure out what they need to go, what they need to go after. So I think oftentimes that gets not enough weight and attention as well.
Yes, I can vouch to this. Our first VC investment was based on that. We were told, what you're doing, something with academia, oh, it's so unsexy and old and dusty and we don't understand, but you guys are good, so it's thumbs up. So
yeah, that's actually that's pretty common actually. Not that the idea doesn't matter, but don't forget about the team.
That's a good one. We have a question about the fintech actually. Sorry, there's lots of questions coming in. I'm trying to can you discuss on the future of fintech products and startups? What currently banks are doing about it and betting on?
Wow. So there, I mean, yeah, there's so much going on in payments and digitization of money. 20 or 30 years ago, it was kind of a backwater that no one was interested in, and now every day there's a new startup in that space. So I think that the trends that you see are one, displacing cash, which in most economies is still a pretty significant portion of commerce. Trying to remove friction from the payment experience. So, even small things like, for example, PayPal has a product where you can opt in and you don't even have to log in to make a purchase. So you could look at that and say, well, putting your username and password, that's not that much effort, but it actually, little things have a big impact in when you go to purchase in the whole that friction and the whole experience. So there's a lot of work around that. A lot of I think it's really interesting. The few companies like PayPal's one, there are a few others like Alibaba and others, but who have two-sided networks. They have merchants, millions of merchants and millions of active consumers. Those are key strategic advantages for companies that are building that. I think that there are many parts of the world, China being one, that's actually many, many years ahead of, for example, the US in terms of digital payments. You can live your whole life in most major cities in China without cash. And that's not necessarily possible in all other. You're just totally using digital payments in very simple ways. So there's all sorts of interesting things going on. There's new regulations in Europe, PSTD2, which opens up banking. Basically, consumers can get permission for third parties to have access to their bank accounts. So that opens up being able to do tokenization of payments and underwriting of credit and other things. So yeah, I probably better stop because we could go on on that one, but lots of interesting stuff.
Couple of more questions. We have time for a couple of more questions. We are going to talk about nonprofits, something I know you also get involved with. While building nonprofits organization, a social innovation, what experience and hurdles we face in building it?
In building the nonprofit organization? I think so. Some are very similar to building a company. Especially if you're a startup. Now the sources of revenue might be different. But be very focused on fundraising. Which frankly not everyone likes to do. It's probably a little bit like being a startup and searching for investors. Not everybody likes to do that, but you have to do that. Putting together your team. Do you have the right team? Even this idea of the customer applies there because, you have who is the group of people, who are we trying to serve, and what are their needs, and how are we best able to do that? And is it something that's a short-term thing, or are we trying to build sustainable, something that's sustainable for the long term? A lot has been written and criticized about that short-term focus of providing food or things in the moment, but not really something that's sustainable over years and decades. So those are some of the things that I think sustainability is really, really more and more important in terms of nonprofits that focus on fundamental issues that are going to generate, either be self-sustaining or generate benefits, decades down the road, whether it's education or economic development, funding small and medium-sized businesses, those kinds of things, can have leverage and multiplying effects.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this. We have time for one more question, and actually I'm going to reserve it for myself, if that's okay. I mean, we talked earlier a little bit about leadership, and you had the advantage of working in PayPal with some amazing leaders who are great leaders in the tech world, and we are looking up to them. In fact, actually, one of them, Reid Hoffman, is somebody I really admire. I like his integrity in combination with approach to commercial success and blitzscaling and any other ideas. And I have to say that being an entrepreneur myself, lots of his podcasts and talk really helps me to go through this hard times, and it helps in general. So working with all those guys like Reid, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, you must come across with them and work with them. What you took away working with a great leaders who became super successful and also lead other companies very successfully.
Yeah. I came after the founders, so I didn't get to work with them directly, but I will say I've had a lot of exposure to all different kinds of leaders and leadership styles. And I do think there's no one recipe for great leadership, but I do think there's some common characteristics. So you can have great leaders who are more extroverts and introverts, that you can find a mix. But I think the characteristics of integrity and authenticity and developing a sense of mission and the right culture, those things are very, very powerful. And I think oftentimes the greatest leaders are not the ones that maybe are as flashy or well known, but they are authentic, and their teams, they may not always agree with their leaders, but they know where those leaders stand. They know that they're people of integrity, and they know that they have the best interest of the company and their team at heart. Those are, you don't always have that. We've all experienced folks that maybe have a different agenda, maybe are more internally focused on themselves, and that's not a great leadership characteristic in my book. So those would be some of the things that I try to model.
That's a lot of traits of academics, actually, but a lot of integrity and focus on the course. So a lot of good grounds to become good leaders as well. Thank you so much for this chat. We are out of time. We could continue talking because the questions keep coming.
Well, thank you, Beatrice, for the opportunity to come and talk with your team today, and just appreciate the time. I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Everybody. Bye.